All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, on the line, I've got John Robb. He writes the Global Guerrillas Report on Substack. It's substack.com/John Robb. And, well, you've heard him on the show before. He's got all this really interesting stuff to say about network science and the Twitter swarms and communications nowadays and what all it has to do with American foreign policy and all of these great things. It's really great to have you back on the show. And it's johnrobb.substack.com works for you too for Global Guerrillas. Welcome back, John. How are you doing?
How you doing, Scott? Doing good.
I'm doing real good. Look, man, mostly I want to ask you about your latest 3 articles. But first, I want to ask you about Al-Qaeda and ISIS, because I know you wrote about a lot about this in what's now the old days of Iraq War II. And I don't know about your coverage of Iraq War III versus the Caliphate and all of that stuff. I tuned into you later than that. But anyway, I know that I read your book on Iraq War II. But see, my thing is I'm terrified of these guys. And I don't mean personally like they're going to kill me because I'm not anywhere near a big target. But I think that they still are motivated to attack the United States. And I talked with you about this before, and you were like, come on, Scott, Al-Qaeda works for us again. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. But, I mean, they worked for Bill Clinton. And, in fact, even W. Bush had the Delta Force training the KLA, who were invading Macedonia in August of 2001. I mean, they were still, Eric Margolis saw American sanctioned training camps for Uyghurs in Afghanistan under the Taliban in July 2001. And they still turn on us and bit us on September 11th anyway. I know everybody's a truther, but I'm not. And in fact, I think the truthers are like the limited hangout because it shuts down all the questions of who these guys are and why they hate us so much and why they might be willing to knock our towers down some more. And it's not just that they hate us, but it's that the strategy is that they have to bog us down and bleed us to bankruptcy and force us out the long way and the hard way so we stay out so that then they can wage their local revolutions. And it seems like Obama and Trump bombing the caliphate that Obama built for them ending in 2017-18 there, that just proves Zawahiri right. That you can't build your caliphate until you get rid of the Americans. And you can't get rid of the Americans until you get them into such a catastrophic cluster F of a war over there that they finally really quit intervening. And so that's why, and then also you do have the hatred part too, and the reinforcement of the reason why they would want to get rid of us in America's support for Israel right now, for one horrible example. And even though I know they fight them a lot, they still are the Americans are still the reason why the Shiites are so much more powerful in the region now as well. And so, and you see ISIS-K and whatever still, and whatever remnants of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they're still out there. The Turks still protect them in the Idlib province. They just attacked Iran and Russia. And why wouldn't they attack the United States?
Well, okay. The only reason they exist is right now is that we've wiped out all of the strongmen that typically destroyed them. I mean, like Saddam Hussein killed jihadis, ate them for breakfast, and Assad did the same. And we're preventing the development of any strongmen that would actually counter them. Are they a threat to us? Potentially. I mean, we left the border open, let 10 million people in, unvetted. Millions of them never even interacted with a border agent, unknown entry, unknown packages that they were bringing in. People from all over the world. It's not Mexicans or even Central Americans solely. It's people from everywhere. And that the U.S. is now vulnerable because of that. I mean, extremely vulnerable. And it's not just from these groups, it's from anyone who sees a benefit in attacking the United States or getting it bogged down in internal turmoil, trying to respond to it. That's my take on it. I'm not really truly worried about them in particular. I mean, we're a lot more alert to potential avenues of attack from those groups than we ever have been. I wrote a report not long ago called the 0-Day Wars. It's a concept of actually using infiltration and technological leverage to take out an enemy before the war even starts. So effectively you win, or you tie them up in a way that they can't respond to whatever you're doing. And my worry right now is more on the China front. And
well, hold that thought for a second. But so on Al Qaeda, what you're saying is that the actual Al Qaeda and ISIS observation and hunting apparatus that they've built over the years is effective enough that they're just pwned by the NSA. The same reason America was able to warn Iran and Russia about the impending attacks is the same reason you think that essentially America's security forces will stop them from getting into the country and doing another attack here. Yeah. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it's relatively effective. I mean, it's not foolproof, obviously, but I'm of the mind that all of our intervention and interactions with the Middle East over the last 25 years have been a massively negative return on investment, both in national security and in terms of socioeconomic progress. And we're kind of reaping that right now in terms of the internal dissension. We're fighting Middle Eastern political battles on the streets of America right now, spending billions, it's something that we could do without. We got pulled in, and we continue to make the mistake to continue to be there.
Yeah.
The best approach would be to focus on trade.
Well, I certainly agree with that, But now, on the specific question of the Bin Ladenites, I mean, from my perspective, and you're, of course, free to disagree with this entirely, but it seems to me like maybe we even underestimated at the time. It really was a win when they killed Bin Laden, because he was able to really get so many different different sects of jihadi groups to respect him and follow his wishes, whereas Zawahiri wasn't. I don't know if you think Zawahiri's really dead or not. They say they got him in that one strike. I don't know if we've really heard from him since then, but it seems like with Bin Laden out of the picture, that makes it harder for them to coordinate attacking way over here, or even stay committed to that doctrine that it's the far enemy that's got to be taken out first and all of that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the only reason 9/11 was so successful, it was that they weren't even on the radar. I mean, this apparatus that we built, this $1 trillion a year apparatus for national security, didn't even have them on a radar as a serious threat.
Well, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very similar to the way Israel treated Hamas. I mean, it was a sense of superiority and invulnerability and infallibility, and that they're so far above this kind of weak, unintelligent, uninnovative, beaten down enemy that they would ever be able to attack them successfully.
Right. Yeah.
That's why they didn't have a plan for an attack from Gaza, and they didn't have any of the planning and any of the preparation, any kind of the serious defense set up, and then it was all elbows and assholes when they finally did it, and they were just spraying everywhere. So it's like you gotta respect the enemy. You gotta get over yourself and focus on it. And I think to a large extent we did that with Al Qaeda and the Ilk. They are a focus, and they do get attention. So that's a big change from 9/11.
Yeah. I know there's a great quote from, I forgot the guy's name. It's in the Weekly Standard, and he's citing a high-level special operations officer saying that the Joint Staff, it was a cliche that they would say in the 1990s at the Pentagon, that terrorism is a small price to pay for being a superpower.
Right.
What are they going to do? Set off a truck bomb in Africa somewhere? Who cares? Right. Blow up, but not sink a ship in port in Aden, whatever. They blow it off. So that definitely makes sense. And I know there's so many anecdotes and now great reporting out of Israel about the way that they treated Hamas. They acted like these are basically the Crips, right? They're basically a street gang, and basically we can just kick their ass anytime. And I know, our mutual friend, Daryl Cooper, has talked about when he was over there, he's a missile defense guy, and he was over there working with the Israelis a lot of times as in the Navy or after when he was a contractor or whatever. But anyway, he spent some time in Israel dealing with their defense people. And they would say, now Hezbollah, those guys are dangerous. They're like a real army now, and we got to really worry about them. But Hamas, come on. And then so they had that attitude of superiority that you're talking about, where maybe only because they had the two to compare and they had that binary. And so they just, one of them has to be the loser compared to the other. So that was the way, Netanyahu said, we control the height of the flame. Not a problem, right? We got to handle. So, all right. So that brings us to what's going on here. Oh, and this is the other reason I'm so paranoid about the Al-Qaeda there, though, is bin Laden said, America supports Israel. And look at what Israel's doing in Lebanon right now. They just killed 106 women and children in a shelter in Qana. And Mohammed Atta and Ramzi bin al-Shibh said, yeah, you're right. I think we're going to volunteer for your Special Forces Battalion now, Mr. bin Laden. And this is the Qana massacre times 1,000 now, or whatever, hundreds. I'm not good at math live, but you know what I mean? This is a lot of Qana massacres in a row here. And we expect, as Ron Paul said, we think we can just go around the world blowing things up and act like we're not putting ourselves in danger, like there's no comeuppance to this. And we do that at our own peril. We're not taking into account the potential consequences of this. We think we have this magical impunity, but we don't.
Right.
So somebody's going crazy over what's happening over there right now. And I'm not trying to encourage them. I'm just saying I'm afraid of them. There are people, and look at the last 10 years of, especially during the Obama years, and I know the FBI framed up a lot of, fake ones, but there's some real terrorist attacks in this country, not on the order of September 11th, but still, San Bernardino and Orlando and a couple of attempts in New York. That guy Zazi from Denver tried to blow up the subway. That was not a FBI put up job. That was a real one. You know what I mean? We could have some things like that still. And then that really raises a bunch of questions about what does the government do then? What happens to the rest of us then?
Right. I mean, any terrorist attack, particularly connected to this war, would result in many more crackdowns. Patriot Act, times 10. I mean, we caught a little bit of that yesterday when Congress passed the censorship bill related to anti-Semitism.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, so a bunch of congressmen who have, given full support and loyalty to the Israel is focused on combating anti-Semitism in the United States, and what they did is they set up a system where they would censor anything according to whatever this outsourced non-governmental entity defines as anti-Semitism, which is, phrases, which is words, which is concepts, which is political speech, something that can change on an ongoing basis. And they passed it. So hopefully it doesn't get through the Senate, but it's definitely an anti-free speech bill. It's like, you can't criticize Israel. Is just a non-starter.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Just codifying that crazy hyperbole that if you criticize Israel, that's just code for you really hate the Jews, which is the stupidest thing and nobody takes seriously. But the Republicans do, and they want to make that the law, that if you criticize like the seizure of the Golan Heights, that means that you burn Torahs or something.
Oh, no, Daryl's right, though. It is about the money in many instances. I mean, the reason why they're pushing this is the money is good, and there's billionaires behind it, and if they move in that direction, they're going to get a lot of financing. It's they've had to split the financial world financing for a long time, so it wasn't the golden goose that it once was before Clinton. And Clinton started cozying up to the bankers on the Democratic side, and then that soaked a lot of the funding away. So, a lot of financiers like to be socially liberal, but they wanted the protections on taxation and everything else that allowed them to make as much money as they could. And so when Clinton promised that, they flocked to him. And they flocked to Obama, and they flocked to. So the Republicans have seen a decline in coffers as a result, and amplified then by Trump. And this is a way to get back some money, and politics runs on money.
Yeah. Yep, makes sense. I mean, they got all those evangelical voters, but they're not rich, most of them. So
yeah, and there's big money being thrown around, and so. They put their hand out and they will go over the top, even if it won't pass or even if it won't get accepted. But they pledge that support, push those agendas. Yeah, it's a pretty corrupt process that we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've always had a thing. There's a thing in fourth generation warfare about primary loyalties. It's this idea that when a state is in decline, the loyalty they used to have to the state, which used to be first and foremost of any large group that you have loyalty to, or any identity that you have loyalty to, starts dropping in importance, and that you find your citizens pledging loyalty to foreign states, foreign causes, different identities based on race, ethnicity. In our case, even orientation. Those loyalties to those identities become primary in their life, and they fight for them at the expense of national well-being and good. So we're kind of in that phase right now. There's a lot of people have subordinated their loyalty to the country, and the good part of that loyalty was that we tried to do things that were for the general benefit and for the good of the United States. And that if we did the right thing, that we'd all prosper and benefit from it. And that's being thrown away.
Yeah. Well, so you remind me of William S. Lind when he wrote about fourth generation warfare. He said, this is, the current paradigm is Brave New World versus Jihadistan. And you could see how Brave New World is a tough sell because it sucks.
Right.
What happened was they changed, as you wrote in this great article, the American way. They changed the American way to some stupid, horrible thing that everybody hates. And so no wonder it's lost all its credibility.
Yeah, Bill Lynn's an old friend of mine. He's a very, very sharp guy.
Yeah, he is. Absolutely. So talk about, you have this great article. You said the U.S.-led rules-based international order is dead. And not just that, it's dying, and senile old Biden is grasping at straws to hold it up, but it's over. They completely blew it in the last 20 years. That's what you're saying here?
Yeah. And, we spent all these years, from visionary, brilliant people in the post-World War II environment, building this international system that allowed us to cobble together free states, free minds in a way that wasn't overly burdensome. We weren't required to send militaries everywhere, only on flashpoints where it was naked aggression coming from the communist world, and it worked. And a lot of that had to do. There's a variety of different things. There's trade, and there's also this moral component. Preventing genocide and preventing war crimes and preventing abuses by nation states, limiting what states can do. And that allowed the whole system to kind of run on its own. And it had a credibility that it was better to be inside the system than outside the system. And that, U.S. increasingly in the post-Cold War environment started to act selfishly. And in a system that has a moral component, if you act selfishly too many times, that it degrades your ability to manage and guarantee that system, the ability of that system to operate effectively. People don't see it as a fair system. And recently, the thing that really hit it and it really damaged it was all the work that the U.S. was doing to try to degrade the enforcement of genocide. And ICJ taking away funding from UNRWA, even though it was like based on tiny rumors or unsubstantiated rumors demanded from the Israelis, and then now going after the ICC and threatening it when it's trying to put war crimes warrants out for Netanyahu and his team. So we're acting for our own needs in a selfish way to attack the system that we spent 70 years building, and that at this point, I think on a global level, that we've discredited our moral status or the value of this system, and our participation in that system, or as a guarantor of it. So what that means is, when you're not seen as a trusted participant in the system, is that everything that we're going to do from now on will be harder. Every treaty that we try to cut, every military adventure that we try to get on or mount, allies won't show up. We saw a little bit of that in the Red Sea lately. I mean, recently is that we sent the Navy out to protect merchant ships, not traveling to the U.S., but traveling to the rest of the countries in Europe and other places, and that nobody wanted to come with us or participate with us. No one had any interest, and that it's increasingly into just the U.S. alone, and that lack of participation and willingness to work with us will then increasingly become opposition to us. Is that when we try to do something, lots of different nations and lots of different groups will try to stop us from succeeding. It'd be like, for instance, like contested trade. I mean, how much work would it be for China to give groups like the Houthis drones capable of taking out and restricting trade flows to the U.S. or trade flows to U.S. allies? It's not hard at all. Or U.S. warships transiting areas, they have to go through in very aggressive formations in order to avoid being damaged by drone swarms. So it's the U.S. international system. I mean, is done. It's over, and our policies, unfortunately, are still focused. It's still kind of based on this assumption that it's still there. That when the U.S. starts criticizing Russia for chemical weapons use, or China for Uyghurs, that it has some weight anymore, and for the rest of the world, it has zero, no weight. No, we don't have any moral standing to make that claim. I mean, we attack the very institutions that were supposed to protect us in this. So there we are.
Well, I don't want to get too far into China because that's such a whole other subject, and I got all these other things to ask you about. But one thing that I know that you've mentioned a few different times is this theory that, well, if we bring them into the WTO and we teach them about property rights and freedom in the market, that'll translate into more of a democratic system over there and this and that. But that didn't really work. We just made a real powerful sort of dictatorship, but with Milton Friedman type economics that work a lot better than their previous system, for example. But it seems to me like that analysis usually doesn't mention, and it seems relevant to me, that it was George W. Bush's fault. That right. Instead of being Ron Paul up there and leading the world by example and being a good friend to China and a real showcase of how self-government works for the rest of the planet in the post-Cold War era, and blame Clinton too, but W. Bush is sworn in January '01. It's kind of symbolic to start off the millennium with this thing. And then what does he do? He says freedom and democracy. And then he goes and he kills a couple of million people and sets the world on fire and tells a million lies and breaks every law and tortures people to death and just absolutely humiliated the Statue of Liberty and the whole concept of, he took the principles we really do believe in, and he just used them like his crass sloganeering for a marketing campaign for an aggressive war, and in great part for Israel as well. Which, when you come to the self-destruction part, who's going to protect Israel after our empire falls because we did what they wanted us to do? You know what I mean? It's another part of this. But China might have been, much more willing to listen if we weren't the most obvious blood-soaked hypocrites in the world over here preaching all of this stuff about constitutional law,
Yeah, as you point out, the decline has been in process for a while, at least in terms of the international system and the like. Iraq War was the kickoff of the steep ramp down to where we're at now. And my critique of that, when Clinton and Gore testified and pushed China's inclusion in the WTO and then left, which I always thought kind of ironic for Gore to push China into the WTO, because that's the reason why the climate crisis is even viable. It went from 150 years down to 30 kind of timeline because of China's inclusion. But what happened was because we were involved in the Middle East and focused on the Middle East, those dead end politics and those negative ROI engagements. We didn't see that we were becoming dependent on China. It didn't make any move to kind of, cap Chinese trades at reasonable levels, and that, like we did with Japan. And Baker went over to Japan and said, "Here's the level we're going to accept. It's going to allow our auto industry to rebound rather than going out of business, and make it work." And they did. And we could have done the same thing with China, but we didn't do it with China because we're focused on the Middle East instead. We dropped the ball and became dependent.
Yeah. Well, even then, the protectionism is a Band-Aid on the problem, which is caused by regulation and taxation, where these companies wouldn't want to go overseas anyway if the U.S. government didn't have their boot on their neck, where they're like, hey, we'd be freer in commie China. And that's why they leave. I know labor's cheaper over there, but they also just have a lot more ability to go into business and run it the way they want.
Yeah, no, even if it is a Band-Aid, it's, putting a cap on trade with China and limiting certain areas of industrial production would have given us some breathing room to recover and potentially mount a serious comeback in those areas. The auto industry is an example of doing that with Japan. Japan was crushing, absolutely killing them in the 90s. And that rather than going out of business, it gave them a chance to retool and rethink their business. So, China came so quick and it expanded so quickly into our system. By the late aughts, they were going from town to town, buying all the machine shops, and taking all the equipment and just shipping it off to China. It was, when they had, state sponsorship and state funding and incentives and mercantile system at their back, they were operating at speeds much faster than ours. I don't think they would ever have democratized in the sense that everyone thinks would be the outcome. Is that fascism is a free market system. It's largely a free market system. It's a capitalist system. Some restrictions on free market activities, but for the most part, it's a capitalist system, but it's run as a authoritarian regime. And China's kind of adopted that model. I think they're more fascist than anything else now. I see fascism not as the jackboots kind of thing that most people define fascism. as is militarism and that kind of stuff, or talking bad about minorities or whatever, is that fascism was a system of governance that solved the problem of how do you mobilize for total war with a capitalist economy. You get the benefits of the capitalist economy, the efficiencies, the decentralization of the capitalist economy, allowing all these like corporate bureaucracies to do what normally would be done in the state, but have the kind of cohesion necessary to mobilize quickly and focus effort.
Wait, are you talking about China or America now?
No, I mean, talking about China. I mean, China is basically a fascist system. It's a system of governance.
A mixed economy, a quasi-free market. Of course, fascism and the free market are polar opposites, but when corporate capitalism.
It is a capitalist economy in the sense
it is still capitalism, but it ain't the free market, which has its own separate definition. But it's, you do sound like you're describing the United States, which is constantly at war and which uses these private companies and bureaucracies to build the war machine that they use to prepare for war all the time, et cetera, et cetera. That was why I was joking that thought you'd change the subject on me there. They're talking about our system. Robert Higgs calls our system a participatory fascism, which is, you can run for office, but you're not going to make it a free market,
Right.
Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education.
Hold on just one sec. We got to make some money here. Man, Starbucks' support for Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign is almost disgusting as their coffee. Don't you just hate them? You, me, and a lot of other people, too. It's time to boycott and divest from those genocidal blood-drinking traitors at Starbucks. But you're still going to need your caffeine in the morning. Well, you guys are going to love Moondo's coffee. It's so good, and the price is right. Check out a massive variety of awesome-tasting coffees at MundosArtisanCoffee.com. You'll be glad you did. That's MundosArtisanCoffee.com. Okay, so on the orientation thing, I wanted to ask, you talk about George Washington and the farewell address. If you ask anybody in D.C. now, they would go, yeah. All of that is obsolete. But I think your point is that, or what is your point here? You're saying that the U.S. changed their strategic focus, obviously, after World War II, but then I guess the demarcation that you're really making here is with the end of the Cold War and what they decided to do with their power after that.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, George Washington's farewell address is pretty much the gold standard for U.S. national security policy for most of our history. And it boils down to a focus on trade, not getting into entangling alliances, intervention in foreign wars and foreign hatreds, many of which are ancient hatreds. Started with the worry that the U.S. would get pulled into European conflicts by being too close to England or being too close to France or any one of those European powers that are endlessly at war, destroying their wealth and their status. And that restraint in acting did a couple of things. It allowed us to provide for the national defense on the cheap. We had the capacity to defend ourselves, but we didn't spend a ton of money on engaging in foreign conflicts. So we're always stocking up dollars as a result of recovering and prospering. The other one was that that restraint caused us to stay out of the big wars of the 20th century until the opportune moment. When the participants were exhausted, like with Japan after it was exhausted in China, and Germany after it was exhausted in Russia, and that coming in late allowed the U.S. to exit World War II far better than it did going in. I mean, despite the losses, but relative to everybody else. And we suspended it slightly with the Cold War, but we still approached it with the same general level of restraint. We adopted containment as Kennan's theory, and we did try to roll back the Soviet Union or China or anyone, and what we did is contain them and let the inconsistencies in their systems cause them to implode, and that's what happened. And we didn't end up in a nuclear World War III as a result. And restraint is a powerful thing. But after the Cold War ended, that mindset changed. There really wasn't a reason to keep this massive military machine and all those people who were working on national security strategy and all that other stuff in place anymore, funded anymore, and their expertise wasn't needed anymore. And then they found a new way to employ it. And that you remember, I mean, Eisenhower worried about or mentioned the military-industrial complex in his farewell speech, and it was true. Is that Roosevelt came up with a way to act to match the fascism and communism and its ability to mobilize for total war by making it profitable. He said companies will fall over themselves for the profit, and the problem is always turning that off. We ran into that after the Cold War. It was impossible to turn it off. So we found ways to involve ourselves in conflicts all over the world, and particularly in the Middle East. And it strained us. It's not allowed us to recover financially. We spent countless trillions on it, driving ourselves deeper into debt. A third of our debt is likely due to just that, more than that. If you count the over expenditure on national defense, it's probably close to half of the national debt that we have right now is directly attributable to that. And it wasn't needed. It just simply wasn't needed. And we're still not able to turn it off. Now we're like invested at a societal level in conflicts that have nothing to do with us. Absolutely zero. So there we are. We should go back to Washington's advice. We're a country that's uniquely positioned, with water on both sides and no natural enemies on the same continent, and that we would even have to worry about in a real sense, and that we should take advantage of that. The best way we could actually participate in the world is demonstrating how to prosper, like we had. We were the first place to wire up every home with electricity, with phones, washing and drying machines, with all the conveniences we have, cars and everybody. I mean, Ford produced more than half of the cars alone in the early teens of the 19th century. So it's like we democratized all of that. We put it into everybody's hands, and we showed the world where to go and how to move forward. And that's the most powerful thing that we could do. But we've lost the plot.
Yeah. And it really is just a matter of special interests, right? I think of Andrew Coburn talked about how, I'm putting words in his mouth here a little bit, but basically the bankers and the oil men already had the Council on Foreign Relations. But Lockheed and Northrop Grumman and Boeing and those guys, they sort of needed their own eggheads to write the studies to justify their profiteering. So they hired the Israel lobby. And that's where we get the neoconservative movement. It was like when Lockheed found Richard Pearl and they all came together. I guess they all worked for Scoop Jackson. And like the idea was we get these neoconservatives to write the doctrines that justify the military budgets. And that was what it was all about. So you can see, and this is, I don't know the right phraseology. You make it so great, so plain in your article here about where this isn't even, we're not even talking about the statesmen, the men in charge, the government officials looking through the eyes of the United States and its interests. They're not even trying. They really are off on, this is just like a lobby doing what they do. And I guess for the rest of us, good luck. Hopefully your lobby can balance us out a little bit. But as far as we're concerned, we're here to sell as many H-bombs to the Pentagon as we can. We're here to sell as many planes and as many ships and as many subs. We do not foresee peace, because if we had peace, then we wouldn't be able to sell subs. So here we got another study about why we gotta contain China or whatever it is, right?
Oh yeah, gearing up for a war with China. In order to keep this whole train going, and it's not even really well thought out. When you conduct grand strategy, when you think about grand strategy, you have to think about where you want to end up. What's the end state, and does that end state that you're imagining match your strengths and weaknesses and the desires of who you are? And I don't think they even have anything in mind. It's kind of like the climate change folks. They never explain where they want the world, what they want the world to look like. A sustainable world. Because if they did, it's a pretty dire world. Like you chew up, everyone has equitable energy allocations, and you chew up all your energy allocation just by running your air conditioning or your beefy PC or whatever it is. No one will accept that, but they keep it vague. They focus on the problem, and it's a problem. The Cold War did something for us, while it was going on, is that in order to protect ourselves against encroachment from, laterally through, movements and socialist movements coming in, is that, we had a focus on trying to do what's best for America and Americans. We had to, otherwise we wouldn't have made it through the conflict. And that disappeared at the end of the Cold War. That need to focus on American progress and what's good for America wasn't needed anymore. And everyone started just grabbing pieces of the country, trying to loot it. I call it the hollow state. Is everyone's just trying to grab a piece of it and make money off of it, and coming up with ways to kind of exploit it. And they're not loyal to it's like kind of a disloyal leadership of sorts. It's like they have some loyalty to the United States, but it's outdated and amorphous, but they are very motivated and loyal to all sorts of different causes and ideas and identities. And they use those to progress, to get elected, to generate funding, to profit at the expense of all of us.
Yeah, in that sense, Joe Biden is the perfect avatar for the decrepit, senile, old, collapsing American empire in a way. It's almost like a comic book we're living in here with this guy. But, one thing that he has, he's not the most arrogant guy, like on a personal level, he clearly is, but he's not the kind of guy who says the big green machine can have its way in Afghanistan. We're going to do whatever we want. He was the one telling Obama, no, man, let's cut and run. And he actually did propose an escalation, but a very temporary one, and focused on mythical Arabs in the country who didn't even exist, right? Ignore the Taliban, do anti-terrorism against Al-Qaeda, which is made up at the time anyway, and then split after a year or two, whatever. So he's not the very worst in that sense, although look at what he's done as president is, and his Russia policy was always a whole different animal than his Afghan one. But anyway, point being, though, I was trying to make before I started rambling, John, was Joe Biden knows he's right. He's got this self-righteousness of Washington, D.C., personified in him. And he knows that if America didn't dominate Europe, for example, or Asia, I don't know what he thinks exactly about the Middle East, but certainly East Asia and certainly Europe, that Russia and China would And that would mean world war and whatever. America has to hold the world together. If without us, it would all go to hell, John. What about that?
It's just nuts. I mean, the damage over the last 3 years to the U.S. national security and status has been immeasurable. I mean, NATO expansion, like George Kennan, pointed out in the 90s, would eventually blow up in our faces as it got too close to Russia and started trying to recruit the former Soviet states, and that would cause a reaction that would unwind all of the progress we made during the Cold War. So, yeah, so offering Ukraine NATO membership, my theory is that he did it to punish Russia for interfering in the U.S. elections in 2016, which is pretty much non-existent relative to, what we were producing ourselves in terms of messaging, and getting Trump elected, and then that they took the punishment to Russia, and it blew up on him. And then they didn't see the problems with Afghanistan, that it wasn't, was completely bereft of any validity, and that they tried to do a withdrawal, and it turned into an evacuation, demonstrating incompetence to the world. And then we get involved in Israel and with Israel in Gaza, and then rather than constrain them, when it was apparent after the second week that this was going sideways and going south, for the good of them and for us, and for the long-term viability of the country, we did nothing. We just let them, sink themselves, and that Biden's just the damage he's done, and this administration has done, and then ramping up conflict with China while all of this other stuff is going on, threatening them at the same time. Their participation opposite us in any of these conflicts would cause us to suffer even more damage. It's just nuts. So no, it's all been a bad thing. I never saw that Russia as a natural energy producer, exporter, or China as real threats in a military sense. I mean, China understands that real power in the late 20th century, as well as the 21st, is gained through effective trade. Strong companies and great products, and making people dependent on what you produce. And if you start using military power around the world, that's the moment that you actually are losing ground, and that your power is diminishing. It's not the highlight. It's not the apex. That's been the case for 300 years. And once you start using military power as a means of actually acquiring, status, you're on the way out. So I didn't. In 2020, you could go to Russia on vacation, and or maybe 2019 before COVID or anything. But is that and then to turn them into the ultimate evil empire? No, that's not. Just doesn't work. It's like, because of the way the network works and the way it's reformatted our thinking processes, we don't have any memory. And what happens is that we go through this period of chaos during any pulse or any kind of triggered event, and that when we come back out of that chaos, out of that cacophony, is that we reset our thinking on the issue, and we forget the things that happened before, and we adopt this new reality, and it's a pretty unsettling time to see this, see what's underway.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a really great segue into your other articles here about the media and the Israel swarm. But first, I want to ask you about nukes here, because, of course, America and China and Russia are all armed with hydrogen bombs, plenty of them. Yep. And they say that China's embarked on a whole new thing. They've gone from 2 to 300 to now the upwards. Some are saying they're at 600 or growing anyway. And America and Russia have, 1,500, 1,700 deployed each. But the idea is that mutually assured destruction basically is foolproof and magic, and therefore there can never be a nuclear war. But it seems like they forget the part about being deterred themselves by the other guy's nukes. They take it for granted that they could never nuke us, so we can push them really far. And I know you must have heard, I don't have footnotes on me, but I have some, if anybody needs some, where they have said over the last 2 years, well, geez, they haven't nuked us yet. Maybe we can go ahead and give them more tanks. Maybe we can go ahead and give them the longer range attack missiles and this kind of thing. We were afraid to push before, but now, Putin, he's a paper tiger. He's not going to do anything. And so they keep escalating and escalating. And I just wonder, how foolproof do you think MAD really is as a bluff, as a way of protecting us? Or are you really concerned about nuclear war with these major powers?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was one of the, probably in the first week of Ukraine, I was one of the few people actually out there saying, wait a second, let's take this slowly, like a nuclear power should, and that we shouldn't push this towards a series of events that would cause a nuclear war. And people were attacking me like crazy. And, the next few months, as escalation continued, and we went all the way up to kind of a embargo on Russia and bellicose rhetoric that called them like the ultimate evil, and we're going to roll them back and all this other stuff, is like, this is just nuts. The people who led us through the Cold War were very constrained. I mean, even Kennedy had a lot of lessons that he learned through the Cuban Missile Crisis, that you do not want to push an enemy into a corner and threaten their existence, because if you did, you wouldn't like the outcome. But we lost that. Part of that has to do with the way we think as a network. I call it a swarm, and that occurred after Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia had already been made out to be this evil empire that intervened in our elections, associated with Trump, absolute evil. And this proved it, right? And that swarm that started out of the opposition from Trump went global. And swarms don't think in nuance. They don't think in normal terms. They just look for maximal outcomes based on what I used to call a plausible promise. This idea that Russia could be defeated and that no intermediary steps are allowed, and that swarms win often by escalating beyond what the opposition could do. It mobilizes everything against the enemy, overwhelms them. And that creeped into our policy. And Biden jumped in front of this parade with the swarm with a baton and started going, okay, I'll act like I'm leading this. But he was adopting their mindset and their rhetoric. And fortunately, there were enough people inside the administration that had some idea of the potential consequences of what would happen. And they were able to constrain our participation in Ukraine to a level that wouldn't trigger things. But it's not nearly enough. We danced around nuclear war through the last couple of years with Ukraine. Letting Ukraine build as a non-ally ally, build drones that hit deep inside of Russia and Moscow that look like cruise missiles. It could have been interpreted at any moment as a nuclear attack. And any other previous time, we'd say, no, don't do that. But we've lost that kind of gray hair wisdom that we used to have, the kind of the insight necessary to actually make those kind of decisions. So no, Matt is not what he used to, and it also goes back to that Washington thing. Matt worked because we were restrained in our approach. We didn't want war. We didn't want to roll back and make the world safe for democracy. We want to roll all the dictatorships back or intervene in everything or micromanage everything. That we were restrained in our action. Luckily, at the time, also through Kennan's kind of insight into the way the Soviet Union worked, is that though it was an expansionary ideology, it was still Russia. And Russia is a paranoid, defensive power at core, at the cultural level. And as long as we didn't roll them back from the gains that were kind of forced on them by World War II, that we would not run into problems. So we were both constrained superpowers going through the Cold War, and that allowed us to exit it in a successful way. It wasn't magic, just based on the nature of the participants. Fortunately, I think China's in the same boat. So they are relatively restrained. They know that to increase their global power, they do that through trade. They might have lost the plot recently by ramping up their military forces. But I don't think they're going to be quick to use nuclear weapons. It's more likely something you will see from the smaller countries that have it, particularly like Israel.
Well, unless they decide they want to take Taiwan and Biden jumps in, right? Because this is going to be my next thing, was on the China question and nuclear war. Here's something I never hear anyone say, John. Never. Does anyone say, we can't fight a war with China over Taiwan? That could turn into a nuclear holocaust. It could become very likely a nuclear holocaust. That's how, again, deterrence means you stay home and deter people. It doesn't mean you wear it as a shield and start a war on somebody else's island 7,000 miles away from your main naval base.
Yeah, no, it's the whole Taiwan defense thing is I think what we'd end up doing, particularly since we've already kind of ceded the point that Taiwan is part of China, even though we had put caveats on it, is that, and the reality is that we don't have the naval force necessary to actually pull off anything meaningful, particularly in transport. Jones Act and other things have destroyed our ability to produce any ships. Is that if China does go for Taiwan, and maybe even prompted by this worry that the U.S. is supplying them with weapons that will make it increasingly hard for them to take it in the future, kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, is that we won't be able to do anything about it. And that, the smart people at least would say, we don't have any means to actually defend Taiwan. The old days, I used to think, okay, we'd sail a carrier group through Taiwan Strait, and if the Chinese dared attack it, then that would, lead to a nuclear showdown where we had the predominance of nuclear weapons. But that's increasingly not the case. China can hit us now in force. So demonstrated by their space program as well as the increase in the number of nuclear weapons that they have. So that strategy, using a sacrificial fleet as the kind of reason to make a nuclear threat credible, it doesn't work in this current context. I don't think we, it's not like China is this like vast expanding power that's going to take over, all of Southeast Asia with their military. If they did, they'd be on their way out. But the same thing with Russia is, focused on his neighbors and that were tightly connected to it, is that we don't have a threat like that, like this expansionary ideology that we have to contend with. We have nation states that are relatively focused on domestic problems, domestic needs. They have some trigger points. And so we should be working on ways to navigate around that rather than, force a confrontation.
Yeah. Hey, you guys, did you know that I don't just write books, I publish them? Well, the Institute does, and I'm the director, so yeah. 13 of them now, including my 4. We published 5 more in 2023. Lori Calhoun and Tom Wood's books about the COVID regime, Joe Solis Mullen on the fake China threat, Jim Bovard's latest, Last Rites, and our managing editor Keith Knight's Domestic Imperialism. And we've got more great titles coming in 2024. Check them out at libertarianinstitute.org/books and help support our anti-government efforts at libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And thank you.
Hey, y'all, Scott here. Let me tell you about Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Who knew? Artificial bank credit expansion leads to price inflation and terribly distorted markets. If you've got any savings left at all, you need to protect them. You need to put some, at least, into precious metals. Well, Roberts & Roberts can set you up with the best deals on silver, gold, platinum, and palladium. And they've been doing this since 1977. Hey, if you just need some sound advice about sound money, they're there for you, too. Call Tim Fry and the guys at 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. Or check them out at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. You'll be glad you did.
It seems like another real problem, again, with Biden personifying the whole U.S. federal government, the whole national security establishment here, is they really, as best they can anyway, in that very like 1984 sense, they really believe their own BS, that history started when Russia invaded Crimea. And we deny that we backed the coup on the Maidan, and we're going with that. We're sticking with that. We don't want to have any discussion about February. We're talking about March, and that's it. And ever since then, we've been defending Europe from Russian aggression. And when Mearsheimer says, come on, you guys made that up after your coup blew up in the loss of Crimea, he's the only one on that stature who can say that, and they refuse to accept that or listen to that. It doesn't make it into any of the tales of the story of the origin of the war. That, you know what, the Obama government with Victoria Nuland driving, they kind of went overboard a little bit, and the thing with what happened there, they won.
No, it started with NATO expansion, and you could see it in the 90s when Kennan wrote his op-ed. You know, it was clear that NATO expansion, you know, and the policy came out of the blue. I mean, it was a hallway conversation between Clinton and some human rights workers that led to the policy. It wasn't reviewed. Big minds didn't get a chance to kind of look at the downsides of it.
What are you referring to there? Because it was H.W. Bush and them who decided on NATO expansion in 1992. But
that was Clinton.
No, it was before him. The Bush government was, I'm writing a book about this right now. The Bush government had already decided we're going to fool them with this Partnership for Peace stuff while we really work on NATO expansion in the background. That was why when Kennan and all those guys opposed it, they were years too late. It was already done.
It was already in motion.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's still, the critiques are still correct, though.
Oh, yeah, totally right. And I used to like to blame Clinton, but it really was Bush even before him. But not that absolves Clinton for what he did, because what he did was he continued that same insane policy, and over the wishes of, you know, people, many people like Kennan, many ambassadors and diplomats and generals and admirals and hardcore Cold Warriors. Even Paul Nitze, who had been the hawk compared to Kennan, said we should not be doing this. You know, Bob McNamara and even Brent Scowcroft said we should not be doing this in the Clinton years.
And opposition to it now seems like a wild idea, right? That people who actually opposed NATO expansion and saw the downsides of it are considered wackos, where all those people, all these minds, great minds, were opposed to it from the get-go.
Yep, absolutely. Listen, can I keep you a few more minutes? I know we're at an hour here pretty much. I don't know what your schedule's like. Okay, so I want to talk about this this Israel story that you have here. This is something that we discussed on the show before, but really the great segue is the thing that you already brought up about the change of the media. I mean, this really is exactly what Neil Postman was predicting in his book, Technopoly, where the technology changes the way that we communicate and the way that we think. As you know, the George Carlin is, you know, on my shoulder is saying, you think in language, you think in, you know, the way that, you know, you got people now with like emojis in place of thoughts or whatever in their head. It happens. And so everything has changed now. And that has a lot to do with what's going on with the Twitter swarm and Israel. And I think it's the height of irony that this horrible Twitter swarm that was really created to defend the horrible Russiagate narratives and then horrible COVID narratives and then horrible Ukraine narratives is not really good on Israel-Palestine. And, you know, I'm not sure whether it's really a gift. It might end up backfiring on us somehow, but at least they got one right finally. But this all has to do with the form of social media and how it's changed the way everybody communicates with each other. And you have all these great bullet points about how just everything about the way our culture, the way the people in our society used to communicate with each other has changed.
Yeah. The media, rather than having, presenting stories in a contextual narrative in a long form, from books to TV shows to even the nightly news, has been transformed into packetized media. And I mean, their original thinker on this was, of course, McLuhan. Says the technology that we use changes the way we think, and that changes the way we organize society. And that happened with reading. When we had the printing press and people started reading, it changed. It actually had physical changes to the way we think. It certainly changed the way we process information, and then it led to massive societal changes to governments based on a piece of paper, right? The Constitution, finance, contracts, academia, you're focusing on science and written product that was shared in that bureaucracy. It was all based on this. So we have this packetization of media, and everything's broken down to single ideas, tiny ideas, lowest possible level. And some of those ideas are emotional, some of them are logical twists, all presented in social networking. And it creates this massive flow of packets. Too much for anyone to process. I mean, you can't process everything that comes across. So to cope, people start to do pattern matching. And pattern matching is, you just let the flow wash over you, and you just pick out the pieces, pick out the little bits of information, packetized information that fits the patterns that you're curating, that are dear to you. Problem is, at a societal level, that ends up becoming those patterns have become social organizations, kind of amorphous open source social organizations. I call them tribal network tribes. Is that network tribes have formed around this pattern matching, this group pattern matching effort. So you have like an anti-racism tribe, and they focus on finding every little bit of news that comes across and fitting it into this anti-racism narrative that shows that everything is systemically racist, and these people are the enemy, and these are the actions of behaviors of people who are racist. These are the speech patterns and language that would be used by a racist. Tribes are built for warfare. They're built on a negative narrative. Not the standard tribal narrative is based on who we are and what we can do better together. The network tribes are based on what existential threat do we oppose, and that came to play with a bunch of these tribes came together to oppose Russia and oppose Putin in Ukraine, and it turned on Israel. And one of the tribes that participated in this, network tribes that participated in previous efforts, the anti-Semitism network focused on the evil of anti-Semites, was cast out, and in part, at least in terms of its defense of Israel. And Israel hit a lot of the buttons of these network tribes. One was the anti-racism. We saw a racial component, a racism component in the way Israel treated Palestinians. They saw anti-colonialist. They saw the colonial dynamic in place in Israel with Gaza, and then they saw the kind of anti-fascist, against what they saw as kind of the fascist dynamic, militaristic, genocide, that kind of stuff. And it was kind of like the trifecta. And these tribes just went nuts. And they took packetized media that, initially it was kind of Israel and the pro-Israel network focused on managing the information flow coming out of the major media, and they've been pretty effective at that. And they thought they were invulnerable to any kind of loss of narrative control. But what they didn't see is that the packetized media traveling over X and TikTok and Instagram and others would flow against them, because they were using every single little video flowing out of Gaza turned into an empathy trigger, little packet empathy trigger showing brutality. Every story, every lie told on the podium at the State Department or the Defense Department, every spokesman that said something nefarious was all turned into a packet and put on TikTok. And frankly, most of that stuff was true. The spin was aggressive, though, and so all of those packets in total were 100 times what the pro-Israel packet level was, and all of them were fit into these kind of pattern matching into these narratives, like I mentioned earlier, the anti-colonialist, anti-racist, anti-fascist narratives, and it resulted in the growing opposition that we saw just recently in Colombia and other places, and the loss of support for Israel among most people in under 30. I mean, aggressively lost it. And that was, in 2021, during an earlier Gaza engagement, I saw indications that Israel was vulnerable to a BLM type movement. BLM was another example of a swarm of network tribes.
Wait, remind us what was beyond?
Yeah, in 2021, there was a online reaction to Israel's bombing of Gaza.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote a brief on it, and it wasn't enough to actually ignite it. And then when this kicked off, this current conflict kicked off in October of last year, it was apparent within a couple weeks that Israel didn't know the war it was really fighting. They thought it was a war on the ground against Hamas or against guerrillas. And that the real war that they were fighting was in the online space. And if they understood that they were fighting a moral war in the online space, that they would have acted differently.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I don't know how concrete this doctrine is, but you do hear this a lot from especially Jewish critics of Israel in America, who point out that, the Israel, from time to time at least, you'll hear the Likudniks referring to the idea that they're better off with a world full of anti-Semites, because then they get to say, in fact, remember a few years ago, there was I forget which anti-Jewish attack had happened, and Netanyahu went to France and said, "You're not French, you're Jews. You should come to Israel." And they were outraged, like, "What are you talking about?" Their whole thing is how they're French, and he's undermining that for his purposes, right? And so it makes sense for them to say, "Oh yeah, that's right, Jews, you're not safe anywhere in the world. That's why you should all come here." And it makes sense for them to say to their own population, "That's right, the whole world hates us. It's a world full of anti-Semites, and that's why you need us."
Yeah, no, I don't think they could have actually, even if they knew this was true, that there was an online war, that they would have changed their orientation to the war.
Fair enough.
It's just too built into this need for revenge. Was just too powerful. And even now, you can see the polls are still like they haven't gone far enough. So inside of Israel, so it's like no, Hamas, to the extent that they could have planned a better trap for Israel, knowing their orientation, knowing their weaknesses. I called it the tactics of mistake, is that you set a trap that the enemy can't help but fall into, and that they can't extricate themselves either.
Mm-hmm. I think you're also saying here that you don't even need a mastermind behind it, right? It's a decentralized secret plot. It's just right there in the open, right? H.G. Wells' open conspiracy to get Israel to shoot itself in the foot.
Right. They were facing existential crisis with the normalization of relations between Israel and the rest of the Arab world. If that had locked in, there was no way that they would ever be able to, leave Gaza or sustain themselves over the long term. their issues would be totally eclipsed, and that this was a last-ditch effort. And it worked. I mean, it was perfect. I mean, it could have fallen apart at any given moment if Israel had a plan to defend themselves, or if Israel had acted, better in the terms of the defense. It would never have been an attack of the level necessary to pull it off. It worked, and now there's a generational global opposition to Israel, and if it ends up resulting in the loss of U.S. support for Israel in the next 10 to 15 years, it's not going to be a net benefit for Israel. I mean, you won't want to live there. I mean, I went to South Africa in the 80s, and I know that you don't want to live in a country that's under that kind of pressure. You can't fly anywhere. You can't visit anywhere. You can't buy the things that you want to buy. I mean, everything is 10 times more expensive. It's just miserable. It's absolutely miserable. And they're a tiny country. They just aren't self-sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, when I know it was a publicity stunt for Biden and everything and whatever the intricate politics of it, but that was what Schumer said in his speech was, it's going to be really bad for Israel going forward if you're an international pariah state. That's right. Not a sustainable future. I mean, I understand it makes sense that Netanyahu is thinking about surviving the next 6 months, but what about the rest of you? He's going
to have an ICC warrant out for him, so no visits to Europe, no visits to a lot of countries around the world. He's going to be locked into this country except for the United States.
Yeah. I think it's funny, the irony. I mean, it's the whole circumstance is dark and horrible, obviously, but the thing about, oh, you're a racist, you're an anti-Semite, is kind of falling flat because in this case, the protesters, they are sort of the wokest, leftist types, and they've essentially already beat them to that narrative that you guys are racist against the Palestinians.
Right.
And you're the ones who are the whiter, more right-wing nationalist faction crushing the indigenous, this and that. It's a purely leftist critique. And then the Israelis come out and go, yeah, this is just, and they're really saying this is just like the rise of the Nazis in the 30s. Well, the Nazis weren't hippies. So that's stupid. It just sounds stupid to anyone listening to it. It doesn't make any sense. You're talking about white kids with dreadlocks. That's not Nazis. They're Marxists or some shade of it,
Yeah, no, I mean, the pressure that they've applied, this kind of zero tolerance for protests, is actually backfired on them. I mean, the early pictures of that encampment in Colombia, it's like 24 people.
Yeah, talk about that. You have those pictures in your article here.
Yeah. It's like they put pressure on the president of Colombia, and at the same time, they set up this encampment, and 24 people showed up. And they were sitting there doing nothing. And if left on its own, it would have gone away by finals. Maybe reoccurred, and then when people broke up for summer, it would have gone away completely. But the worry that they had lost control of the narrative, and they have, was so intense that they mobilized political, the pro-Israel faction mobilized political and military-like power to crack down on and put pressure on getting the police to remove them, and that immediately blew up. The protest grew, 100-fold. It's like, and then there was professors, even if they disagreed with the premise of the protest, were out there protesting what they were doing to the students. And then it spread. It went campus to campus to campus, and all of this, narrative that most people who are, older, over 55 crowd, who represent 7/8 of the nightly news, TV nightly news crowd, don't understand. Never saw that counter narrative. Didn't see that anti-Israel narrative. This was all a surprise, and it just blew up and it went everywhere. All the efforts to then crack down on it and increase the level of censorship is not winning anyone over. Granted, they were able to force a bill through that would force TikTok to divest, but I think they're going to fight it all the way to the end. And there's millions of people dependent on it.
Well, that's electoral suicide for the Democrats. I don't know what they're thinking.
You know what? Adam Townsend the other day said, the Democrats must think that they are completely impervious to any kind of electoral defeat. That they are so sure that they are going to win that there's no way that they're acting like it, and that it doesn't really matter what all these people think, we're going to win. And they're doing everything as if they didn't even have an election coming up. And I don't know. There is a lock on so many things right now that and there's going to be a lock as the fall heats up on social networking too, like it was in the last election cycle, kind of filtering out anything that's anti-Biden or whatever.
Long hot summer, man, it's coming. And that's the thing is there is the online swarm, but that online swarm, it operates by text message too, not just by tweet, right? So I don't know exactly who's running those networks, but remember that great article about how they really did kind of rig the election against Trump, and they talked about how they were able to turn on those leftist mobs and turn them off. And one great example of that was they ordered the leftists, who you would think there's some, you talked about the decentralized nature of it. On the other hand, they said, don't show up on January 6th. Stay away. And they did. They all stayed away. And they were able to turn them on and turn them off all summer long. That article, for people looking, it was in Time or Newsweek. I think Time had the whole thing about it there. You know the one I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, and I had people ask me, I watched all the videos in real time on January 6th, and people ask me, should I go? I go, no, leave. Leave immediately. This is like a Reichstag fire stuff, man. You're gonna be targeted after this.
Yeah.
This is going to be politicized.
Well, by the way, yesterday, I think it was yesterday. I get things mixed up a little bit. Maybe day before yesterday. I'm sorry, I forget the name of it, but it's the official student organization of the Democratic National Committee voted to side with the Palestinians and against what Israel's doing. I forgot the exact details, but it was.
Oh, there's a generational time bomb. It is so extreme, so negative to Israel with younger voters.
Yeah. Well, you're looking at a 6-year-old with her legs blown off to death, and you go, well, whoever did that is in the wrong.
Yeah, no, it's these tribes. I mean, they've locked in the narrative, and these kids, they grew up on this stuff. This is how they think. They think as pattern matchers. They're natural born pattern matchers, and this is a pattern that I don't think Israel's going to be able to shove off, even if it puts pressure on the media companies, the social networking companies to kind of filter it out.
Well, a couple of months ago, I watched the PBS NewsHour, and they just said, oh, man, October the 7th was really bad, and did a 20-minute segment on that. And it was like, that was 4 months ago. I don't know. That's what they're talking about instead of talking about Gaza. But I also have to admit that ever since Hillary Clinton started running for president, and again, in 2015, I turned the TV off. I just can't listen. And then ever since then, I haven't really turned it back on that much. And so I'm pretty ignorant of TV. Yeah. Well, do you know, or is anybody even tweeting about, like, is there much change in the cable TV news coverage of this? Because I could have told you a few years ago that they never show a map of the occupied territories. They never explain that the Israelis are occupying the Palestinians, and the Palestinians are the beaten, imprisoned Indians on the reservation getting bombed here kind of thing. But the power differential is so stark during this slaughter. I just wonder if that's really... I know that, what's her name, Clarissa Ward from CNN has done a couple of things that I've seen online, but I just wonder if if the online swarm, I think you've made reference to this, the online swarm really is upstream from TV, and TV is forced to also adapt these same packets of information, as you call them.
Or they lose all relevance. So they have to adapt. They have to adapt the tone.
But are they?
Perspective. What?
Are they now?
On the sides. I mean, most of the editorial coverage, most of the coverage and the phrasing and the conjugation they're using in the news is still pro-Israel. So, but there's on the edges, they're letting the opposite view creep in.
Yeah.
And
in fact, when I was watching the Lair News Hour, my phone in my hand, my phone in my hand has dead kids on it. Dead Palestinian kids. And then I'm looking at TV, and TV's like, remember that one bad day months ago? We're going to talk about that again today, about how the Israelis are the victims in this thing. And it's just couldn't be more stark, the propaganda, you know?
You should see the pro-Israel stuff on TikTok. It gets like 10 views, 10 likes. It's awful. They can't even open up the comments.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's like, it is really dire. And,
you know,
and
I know
ratios.
that on the God. YouTube shorts, you know, those things where like they get you, it's a little dopamine addiction thing. You go from short little clip to short little clip on YouTube. I watched like one pro-Palestine thing and they fed me 100 pro-Israel things after that, or they tried to, you know.
Well, see, the Google and Facebook are the opposite, but they're losing relevance. I mean, TikTok is the most used platform in the world. So it's like, it is where anyone under 30, 35 gets almost, they use it as search. They use it as everything. And man, it is packetized media to an extreme. It is really, for the most part, I mean, it does screen out nudity and stuff like that. But frankly, it's probably one of the freest networks out there.
How dumb am I for writing a book right now, John?
What?
How stupid am I to write a book right now?
Books are cohesive ideas of size. It's not going to go away. Books won't go away at all. I mean, the new media stuff is there, and it will become dominant, but it won't completely erase all the stuff that came before it. I mean, we still have plays, and we still have movies that are kind of long narrative structures, spoken word, visual. We have books. All that stuff still exists, and people still make money from it. But no, the dominant media is the one that's is reshaping our thinking. And my worry ultimately is that we, for whatever reason, and a series of bad reasons, that we let people who have the capability to do it, let AI choose which packets of media and topics and things that we get access to, and that kind of control of conversations at every level, made easy by AI, because AI is scalable to that kind of level. You can monitor and manipulate conversations, from billions of people simultaneously. Mm-hmm. Something you couldn't do in any of the authoritarian regimes with, buildings full of bureaucrats before. That we're going to end up in what I call the long night. Is this that all thought is going to be narrowed down to this narrow orthodoxy of approved thought, and a sterile, banal. All innovation dies, and it eventually runs afoul relatively quickly of human nature and reality, and that it causes a general collapse.
Hold on just one sec. We got to make some money here. Man, Starbucks' support for Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign is almost disgusting as their coffee. Don't you just hate them? You, me, and a lot of other people, too. It's time to boycott and divest from those genocidal, blood-drinking traitors at Starbucks. But you're still going to need your caffeine in the morning. Well, you guys are going to love Moondo's coffee. It's so good, and the price is right. Check out a massive variety of awesome-tasting coffees at moondosartisancoffee.com. You'll be glad you did. That's moondosartisancoffee.com.
Hey guys, I had some wasps in my house, so I shot them to death with my trusty Bug Assault 3.0 model with the improved salt reservoir and bar safety. I don't have a deal with them, but the show does earn a kickback every time you get a Bug Assault or anything else you buy from Amazon.com by way of the link in the right-hand margin on the front page at scotthorton.org. So keep that in mind. And don't worry about the mess. Your wife will clean it up. Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen. All of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free. Just sign up for the email list at the bottom of the page at scotthorton.org or go to scotthorton.org/subscribe. Get All the War Lies by me for free.
and then you'll never have to believe them again. Well, you know, I mentioned Neil Postman earlier, who wrote that book, Technopoly, back in the 90s. And
Yep.
His complaint about all this AI, and not even AI, but just computer stuff. And I think he does talk about the future of AI, you know, somehow in there. But basically, it's the diffusion of responsibility away from individual people. So you would always have some dingbat making the wrong call and censoring the wrong channel. Oh, we can't have this pro-Hitler stuff. But then you're going to have some idiot censor a professor who has some examination of Hitler on there because they're too stupid to understand what they're looking at. But at least they're a person and they can be corrected and fix something if there's a mistake there. But the AI is at least as stupid and probably more stupid. And so, you know, I don't know if you're aware of Tom Engelhart from TomDispatch.com. He's a progressive type, and he ran a thing that was critical of, I'm pretty sure it was like some January 6th stuff, Donald Trump trying to stay in office kind of thing that they were being critical of. And then they got in all this trouble and got on, I forgot which blacklist or whatever for that. And it was probably because the computer says that you're a bad guy now. If you're pro this guy who's the presumed major party candidate for president, that makes you an enemy of the state, and we get to censor you off the internet based on total misunderstanding of a paragraph in an article, you know?
Yeah, no, it's just training the biases that are trained into these AIs. It, you know, creates contextual errors that are impossible to test for, and then figure out where they're at. I mean, you see it creeping into even like something as mundane as HR, right? In hiring, you let these systems decide, you know, which resumes make it through, and they filter out all the rest. I mean, you talk to anyone who's like actually got a job, and they said through the back channel of talking to people and getting hired, and you go to the HR and they go, "Wow, we can't find more people like you," and they go, "You filtered me out at the first pass. You never let me through." And they go, "What?" Well, they didn't know. They outsourced their screening process to these systems that they operate in ways they don't have any clue as to why they do what they do. And you know, we're going to do that on a mass scale, and that's scary. It's you know, I mean, there's intentional biases and there's unintentional ones that are being built in that are going to cause all sorts of problems.
You know what? I think more than before, and I've been at this a very long time, but I daydream all the time about the Joe Biden Never Lived Act that just undoes all this stuff. No more Patriot Act, no more censorship, no more war, no more NATO expansion, undo the empire, return to some kind of normalcy, abandon the empire to save the USA kind of a thing, some sort of rollback. But then there's no kind of consensus among, say, for example, the network swarm that's what we need is Ron Paul's Freedom Restoration Act and the undoing of the worst of the government's abuses here. We're talking about what you're really saying, John, is you're describing the ultimate American totalitarian dystopia where the central government, through its proxies, prevents us from talking to each other, doing anything about their abuses of power ever again.
Oh yeah, no. If you don't think that the government in the Western governments are capable of doing the most heinous things, then you haven't been paying attention last year or two, or 3 or 4. I mean, I thought it was, Western governments were incapable of participating in something that could be construed as genocide, right? I thought it was impossible. And trying to, then explain it away or cover it up. And I'm thinking, wait a second, if they could do that there, they can do it anywhere. I mean, they can explain it with the right context. They could say, this internal population's a danger. We got to take them out. We got to, and it could be extreme, and it could be explained away, and that people would attack and troll and diminish any argument against it. Or the bill yesterday on censorship. I mean, it was so flagrantly anti-First Amendment it should have been obvious. And when I started opposing it yesterday, saying this is just, when I feel unsafe becomes a reason to or justification for extreme censorship, then that's an abuse of power. That's like authoritarian and awful. And that, fortunately, almost everybody I like and respect his minds all jumped on and said the same thing. So I was like, okay, I thought I was hanging out there, but I'm not. But the government will do things, and we saw it in COVID, and we saw it in recently restarting the Cold War. Never thought that it would restart the Cold War from nothing. And that, it's whatever your limitations and what you think the Western governments are capable of in this, post-Cold War era, in the 21st century, there aren't any limits, and extreme actions will be justified, and they may attack groups that you're a part of. So, and make you the target. And the only thing we could do to protect ourselves against that stuff, especially as power becomes more and more centralized through autonomous weapons and the like. I haven't even touched on that, but I mean, what Israel showed in Gaza with the drone attacks and targeting systems is that you can automate mass death.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing about Terminator.
Soldiers saying no, it's just done.
Yeah,
it's an automated system.
Yeah, you don't need the AI to go rogue. You just need the military to have control of it and use it to kill people all the time. That's exactly what they would do with it anyway.
No, it's the people who control the AIs and control the autonomous weapons and do it at scale. And they come up with this wacky justification for doing it. And any group in the West is a potential target if they run afoul of the establishment or whatever swarm that.
How much of an advantage do we still have, though, in just their absolute incompetence, right? Because ultimately we are talking about Brazil, not 1984, where they're just,
just incompetence. Yeah, well, a lot of the incompetence shows that, it's kind of the hollowness, right? I mean, how could we miss the ineffectiveness of the counterinsurgency in Afghanistan, such that when we tried to withdraw, it turned into an evacuation, where U.S. troops and civilians were surrounded at Kabul airport and within mortar range, and we could have been decimated, held hostage, where people are, hanging on to the gear of planes. How could we miss that? I mean, so completely miss it. It's just incompetence. Yeah, sure. And incompetence combined with malice and wacky ideas is a pretty volatile, in a networked age, is a pretty volatile thing.
Yeah. Well, it was the pride, too. I mean, Donald Trump had a deal with the Taliban. He got Zalmay Khalilzad to cut the deal, which I would have thought he would have just sabotaged it and kicked the football further down the field, but no, they had a deal, and Biden put it off for 4 months, but the Taliban didn't put off their timetable. So we should have already been gone before they walked into Kabul. But it was just his pride that he didn't want to do what Donald Trump said. He wanted it to be his withdrawal instead.
Yeah, no, I testified in front of the Armed Services Committee back in 2009. Said, they asked me about Afghanistan. I said, let's get out. Let's create an excuse right now and get out. This is a no-win. We could have saved $1.5 trillion if they had followed at least that advice.
And McGregor had tried to get him to withdraw in the summer and then again in the winter of 2020. And in fact, he did issue an order to get out of Afghanistan in December 2020. And then they, just like in Syria and whatever, they rolled him and he rescinded it. Right. But that's what he should have done, was gotten out of there when it was still cold outside and before fighting season had begun again.
Oh, yeah, no, and then they say U.S. troops are at risk if we withdraw, and then they lobby this, get involved, and it goes away. Or they ignore it, and they sandbag them and say, oh, we're doing as fast as we can, but we can't move that quickly and be safe.
Right. And then they
Right.
cause this catastrophe, and 13 Marines mostly get killed, and
Yeah,
all the
no,
100 and
no.
something Afghans.
What we saw with Trump, though, was interesting is that presidents don't have any power anymore. They're, somebody's mentioned that there were factotums for the establishment, right? So it's like they can't order anything done that hasn't already been approved by the establishment. And the establishment, determines what gets done and what doesn't get done, what the limits are. And if the president doesn't have any power, where are we at in terms of being a democracy?
Yeah. I mean, we saw this with the encroachment in the Senate back a few years ago. Some of these real telltale signs, like when John Brennan was spying on Dianne Feinstein's staff and even trying to get them prosecuted for receiving a leaked true history of the torture program. Like, who the hell does this guy think he is? And I ain't no Feinstein fan, but that doesn't matter. The point is, she was the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. His only,
nothing
he had a duty to her. She was supposed to be ma'am to him. Who the hell does he think he is?
Right.
And, Senator Rockefeller, too, had said, someone had cornered him in the hallway and said, why don't you get to the bottom of this, whatever, the spying or the torture? And he goes, what do you think? That we can ask these intelligence agencies to do things and that they're responsible to us? That's not how it works.
Right.
They just don't, we can't touch them from here.
Yeah. And then you hear Tucker talking to this, about this the other day, and he goes, everybody on the Hill is absolutely mortified, scared of the intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
And
by the way, I might emphasize that that's John D. Rockefeller IV, by the way. J. Rockefeller, you would think he's one of the most powerful guys. He was the son of Winthrop or whatever. One of those.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like we've institutionalized Hoover. Right. Everyone talks about Hoover and having, his blackmailing and his manipulation of the political system, but we've institutionalized it. We've decentralized it. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's become a kind of a anonymous beast of sorts. The system just opposes change and does not want to get out of Cold War mode.
Yeah. Well, so
Cold War mode is money, it's life, it's expertise, it's who they are.
So what about the opportunity in this, John? I mean, can we get we got the Twitter swarm, the network swarm is more or less on the right page. I know that there are problems with leftists and things, but they're more or less doing the right thing on Israel now. So can
open source, it has open source dynamics, so you're always going to get wackos.
Right.
And the same thing on every kind of network movement and organization. It's made up of people who have different motivations for joining, and a lot of them are wackos. So if you interview them individually, you're going to find it makes for great little snippets, but packetized media, right?
Yeah.
If you interview them, they say something stupid, but it doesn't really change. It doesn't shift the ball at all. Is there any opportunity? I don't know. I like a lot of the stuff that's gone on the outside. I mean, I see a lot of stagnation, say, in defense, right? Like producing the wrong thing, overly expensive, not working. If the U.S. does get in trouble, that it won't be able to actually respond effectively. And then I see people coming in from the outside, kind of like John Boyd's Mafia, that is meant to, redid or rethought, how we build aircraft and came out with the F-16 years ago. Kind of outsiders, but with insight. And you get like Musk coming in with SpaceX and taking on a broken, bureaucratic, expensive, uninnovative space industry and completely putting it out of business, and by reinventing it and then turning the U.S. into a kind of the dominant space launch nation. It's like it's not even close. And then you see Andrew coming in and winning the autonomous aircraft stuff, coming out of none of the traditional kind of defense contractors even approaching what they did, and they're going to reinvent that space. And there's ways of doing it. I was working recently trying to do the same thing as shipbuilding. I mean, we lost all the shipbuilding everywhere else in the world except for the United States now, largely because of our laws and the way we structure things. And moving towards kind of an autonomous modular system that doesn't go through big ports and can go to almost every small port and works off of containers. And these are smaller modular ships that are electric, swap in and out batteries on using containers. It could put us, by reinventing the industry, turn us into the shipbuilding capital of the world. I mean, overnight, by reinventing it, and also provide us, extra capacity if it comes to terms of defense. So, coming in from the outside, it's possible to reinvent things, and haven't seen it yet. Truly, in the political space, lots of people trying to do that, like Pelagi and stuff, picking up in this kind of network state idea. I played with it in 2010, and I just never figured out a way to actually make it kick. But it's possible that we can create on the outside things that will compete with the things that we're currently dealing with and put them out of business, replace them.
Yeah.
So that's hope for the future, but it's always a long shot. We'll see.
You're right.
Yeah.
We're stuck with a hell of a national security state with a money printing machine and a lot of rifle power. Ultimately, they're not going to just give it up without a fight. But it's interesting, as you say, like the contradiction between, in the country, people are less and less loyal to even the idea of the USA in an old-fashioned sense. You know what I mean? It's like radio used to be the thing, but now it's not. That's kind of happened with this whole thing. At the same time that our government insists on maintaining this world empire, when if you really wanted to save the first, you'd give up the second there,
Oh yeah, I don't think anyone truly appreciates the loss of loyalty that happened with people under 30 when they saw the U.S. Supporting Israel on this. I mean, it was, wow. I mean, so extensive and so extreme that they hear the U.S. is complicit in this thing that they thought was impossible, and that loss of loyalty, you can just feel it. Just, these kids will never serve in the military or do anything. It's like, this is like, never see the U.S. as a good place.
It's their Waco.
Yeah, but on a mass scale, I mean, we're talking like 60%, 70% of the population.
Yeah, well, that's maybe because it's Waco every day for 7 months in a row. No wonder.
Yeah, no, but yeah, just casting the U.S. and it's that pattern, once it's fixed in their heads, is not going to go away. It just doesn't disappear. It's how they process information from here on out, and no amount of like alternative messaging is going to displace it. They're just going to read it in the way that the pattern dictates, and yeah, that's not good in terms of trying to resurrect the concept of the United States going forward.
Well,
no, that's a depressing note, huh?
Yeah, well, I'm really a moderate for an anarcho-capitalist, and I'd be willing to settle for completely abolishing the empire and saving the old Constitution if we could have anything like it. But, problem is, once the last of that old law is gone, then we're just at the mercy of this craziness. And you could see how.
Yeah, I mean, if you were thinking in terms of networks and how do you create cohesion at a national level using network thinking, is that you find ways to make it participatory in the sense that if the U.S. sees this GDP increase, you get wealthier at the rate of increase in that GDP. And that you're participating in the upside. And how to do that there's lots of ways to do that, but you should have like good kind of equity, not equity like parity of outcomes, or we're talking equity in terms of ownership equity in the success of the systems and the networks that you're participating in. And that's something that we haven't done. You see the GDP going up massively over the last 20 years and seeing incomes just stagnate. and seeing costs rise, eating up any kind of income increase that we.
Well, speaking of opportunities, I mean, this is an opportunity for real free market economists to explain the argument for hard money. And because I saw a poll that said that even above immigration, inflation is the number one issue this year. And Austrian school economists, we need to be exploiting the hell out of that and explaining to people that, no, you're right. But let us elaborate about how this system is rigged against regular people, you know?
Yeah. But trying to update it to a network level,
right,
and network cohesion is that participation, that equity, kind of ownership, has to be made more explicit.
It's got to be a moral outrage against those devils at the Federal Reserve, right?
Yeah, you won't see it, but it is kind of funny though. There, behind these kind of network tribes, there is a core moral basis, you know, that's probably good, that would propagate everywhere, but it's taken to extreme levels, which makes it negative. And you know, what do you do in a world, you know, that global information flows and global population flows and everything else, where religion is in decline in the West, and there's so many different religions and so many different ways of looking at the world, that how do you develop a common moral standard? And that, is there some kind of minimal moral standard that we can build together that could provide us some kind of structure to how we interrelate with each other, that's beyond states? And these networks are kind of trying to aim for that, trying to achieve that, but they do it in such an aggressive, overly complicated, maximalist way that they're, you know, rather than focusing on just like a minimalist approach, which is ultimately what they should be aiming for, what we should be getting out of these organizational forms. It's like after the printing press hit, you know, in Europe, all these different organizational types came about, and they went through a kind of a evolutionary process that made them, at the end of the day, effective, as we learned to kind of dampen them, you know, cut off the bad parts and keep the good parts, and improve it and systematize it. Is that we found ways to turn, you know, bureaucracies into something that are positive. And even joint stock corporations, like the earliest ones of it, that was the East India Company, and it turned out to be a monster. It's like, you got to figure out ways to actually make these things work correctly. And this is what I think we can do with these networks, but on setting up basic moral standards, minimal moral standards. But maybe I'm wrong on it, but I think it will evolve.
Yeah, no, I mean, bottom line, we like to think that the arc of the universe bends toward a reasonable argument, you know, that if we're free to hash this out, that's what Thomas Jefferson said, that like, go ahead and everybody argue, and then whoever wins is the one who's right, is the best we can do, you know? What are you going to do? But yeah, that's why the censorship regime has got to be the worst thing. And it's there's something where, you know, the network swarm has got to internalize how important it is that they have the right to be one at all. That could be taken away from them. They need to be the pro-First Amendment network swarm. That anybody who's a threat to the First Amendment, we swarm on their ass. This is our highest value. You get to choose which church you go to, and you get to say whatever you want. It's the First Amendment.
They're looking at it as a, you know, they want to align everything with their viewpoint, with their pattern. They want to push their pattern onto everyone and every organization.
Yeah.
Every network has to align with them. And that's how they wage warfare. That's how they think. And now it's not nuanced. And it has to be. It has to find a way to actually accomplish that. To minimize the demands and maximize the nuance.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. It's been great. I hope everyone will go check out Global Guerrillas.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
Have a good one.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com,
antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.